The courtroom hummed with a low, nervous energy, the kind that settles in a room full of people who would rather be anywhere else. It was a Tuesday morning, and the sun, trying its best to be cheerful, streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating swirling dust motes and casting long, somber shadows across the polished wooden floor. To most people in the room, it was just another day, another file on a judge's crowded docket. But for the small family sitting at one long table, it was the day their entire world might be decided. At the center of it all was a little girl named Maya. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with wide brown eyes that seemed to be taking in everything and nothing at the same time. Her feet, clad in scuffed black Mary Janes, dangled high above the floor from the hard wooden chair. She swung them back and forth, a slow, rhythmic motion. The soft tap of her heels against the chair leg the only sound she made. In her arms she clutched a teddy bear. It wasn't a new, fluffy bear from a toy store. This one was old, its fur a matted, patchy brown, one of its button eyes slightly loose. It had been through a lot, just like her. It was her silent witness, her only anchor in this sea of adult faces and confusing, big words. Beside her sat her mother, a woman named Isabella. Isabella's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wore a simple blue dress, and every few seconds she would smooth a non-existent wrinkle on it, a small, repetitive gesture that betrayed the storm of anxiety raging inside her. She kept glancing at Maya, offering a tight, encouraging smile that never quite reached her eyes. It was a smile meant to say, "Everything is going to be okay." But it looked more like a prayer. On Isabella's other side sat the man they called David. He was Maya's stepfather, a tall man with broad shoulders and a kind face that, at that moment, was set in a mask of grim determination. He had one hand resting protectively on the back of Isabella's chair, a silent gesture of support. He was the reason they were all here. He was the man who, for the past 4 years, had been the only father Maya had ever really known. He was the one who taught her how to ride a bike, who read her stories at night, who made silly pancakes on Saturday mornings. And now, he was the man fighting to keep her in his life, across the aisle. At another table sat Maya's biological father, Robert. He was a thinner man, with a restless energy about him. He couldn't seem to sit still, constantly tapping his pen on the legal pad in front of him, or shifting in his seat. He would look at Maya, and for a second, his face would soften with a complicated mix of love and longing. But then his eyes would drift to David and Isabella, and his expression would harden into a wall of resentment. He was here to claim what he believed was his. He was her father, by blood. And he felt that was the only thing that mattered. Presiding over this tense gathering was Judge Miller. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with a face that was lined with the kind of wisdom that only comes from seeing decades of human conflict. His hair was a neat silver, and he wore black-rimmed glasses that he would occasionally take off to clean with a handkerchief. A gesture that gave everyone a momentary reprieve from his steady, piercing gaze. He had seen cases like this 1,000 times. Custody battles were always messy, always painful. They were a tangled web of accusations and counter-accusations, of parents so focused on their own hurt and anger that they sometimes forgot about the small, quiet child at the center of the storm. He looked down from his high bench at the scene before him. Isabella and David, the solid, stable unit, the defenders of the status quo. Robert, the challenger, the disruptive force from the past. And Maya, the silent prize. He had read all the files. He had seen the reports from the court-appointed social worker. He had heard the preliminary arguments. On paper, it was a straightforward case. Isabella and David were arguing that Robert was an inconsistent and unreliable presence in Maya's life. They claimed he often canceled visits at the last minute, that he moved around a lot, and that his lifestyle was unstable. They painted a picture of a happy, thriving home, a loving family unit that should not be disturbed. Robert's lawyer, on the other hand, argued that Isabella and David were deliberately alienating Maya from her father. They claimed they were poisoning her mind, turning her against him, and that Robert was a loving father who was being unfairly kept from his daughter. It was a classic he said, she said situation. a bitter war of words where the truth was likely buried somewhere in the middle. Judge Miller sighed quietly. He had a feeling this was going to be a long day. He would listen to more testimony, more character witnesses, more experts who would use big, clinical words to describe a little girl's life. He would weigh the evidence, try to separate fact from fiction, and in the end, he would have to make a decision that would inevitably leave one side feeling broken and betrayed. It was the part of his job he hated the most. He looked at Maya again. She was still swinging her feet, her gaze fixed on her teddy bear. She seemed to be in her own world, a small, safe bubble that she had built around herself. The judge wondered what was going on inside her head. Did she understand what was happening? Did she know that the grown-ups in this room were fighting over her like she was a piece of property? He hoped not. He hoped she was just thinking about cartoons or what she was going to have for lunch. He hoped the weight of all this hadn't crushed her spirit. "All right," the judge said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the low hum of the room. "Let's proceed. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may call your next witness." Isabella's lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit, stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "we call Maya to the stand." A collective, almost imperceptible shift went through the courtroom. This was it. The moment everyone had been waiting for and dreading. Testimony from adults could be dissected, cross-examined, and discredited. But the words of a child, they carried a different kind of power. They were seen as pure, unvarnished truth. Isabella flinched. She turned to Maya and whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. You just have to answer some questions. Remember what we talked about? Just be brave." Maya looked up at her mother, her big brown eyes filled with a question she didn't know how to ask. She gave a small, hesitant nod and slid off the chair. A kind-looking woman with a clipboard, the court advocate, came over and took her hand. "Come on, Maya," she said softly. "You're going to sit in that special chair up there so everyone can hear you." Maya walked slowly towards the front of the room, her hand held tightly in the woman's. She felt all the eyes on her, a heavy, uncomfortable weight. She kept her head down, focusing on the scuffed toes of her shoes. She climbed the few steps to the witness stand, a big, imposing chair that seemed to swallow her small frame. The court advocate helped her get settled, placing a cushion behind her back so she could see over the tall ledge. The court clerk approached her, holding a small book. "Do you know what this is, Maya?" she asked gently. Maya shook her head. "This is a Bible," the clerk said. "I'm going to ask you to put your hand on it and promise to tell the truth. Can you do that for me?" Maya looked from the Bible to her mother, who gave her another one of those tight, encouraging smiles. She looked at David, who gave her a reassuring nod. She looked at her father, Robert, whose face was now a mask of desperate hope. Finally, she looked at the judge, who was watching her with a calm, patient expression. She felt a knot of confusion and fear tighten in her stomach. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was very, very important. She knew she was supposed to say the right thing. She slowly placed her small hand on the cool, smooth leather of the Bible. "You solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the clerk asked. Maya's mouth felt dry. She swallowed hard. I promise," she whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the quiet room. The judge gave her a gentle smile. "That's fine, Maya. You can relax now. Just speak loudly enough so we can all hear you." Isabella's lawyer stood up and approached the stand. She smiled at Maya, a warm, friendly smile that was meant to put her at ease. "Hi, Maya. My name is Ms. Peterson. Do you remember me?" Maya nodded. "Good now. I'm just going to ask you a few simple questions, okay? And you just need to tell me the truth." Maya nodded again, her grip tightening on her teddy bear. "Can you tell the court who you live with?" Ms. Peterson asked. "I live with my mommy," Maya said, her voice a little louder this time. "And with David. And is David your daddy?" Maya hesitated. She looked over at David, who was watching her intently. "He's my stepdaddy," she said. "He lives with us. He's my daddy now." Ms. Peterson smiled. "And are you happy living with your mommy and David?" This was the question, the one they had prepared her for, the one that was supposed to seal their case. Maya's eyes darted around the room. She looked at her mother, whose face was etched with anticipation. She looked at David, who gave her another encouraging nod. She thought about her room with the drawings she had made taped to the wall. She thought about the garden in the backyard where David had helped her plant sunflowers. She thought about the feeling of safety she felt when David would tuck her in at night. But then, a different thought flickered in her mind. A dark, scary thought that she always tried to push away. A thought about the basement. A thought about locked doors. A thought about the secrets she was supposed to keep. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. The happy, simple answer she was supposed to give wouldn't come out. She just sat there, silent, her eyes wide with a fear that no one in the room, not even her own mother, truly understood. The courtroom waited. The silence stretched on, becoming heavier and more uncomfortable with each passing second. Ms. Peterson's friendly smile began to look a little strained. Isabella started to look worried. David's brow furrowed in confusion. Judge Miller leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the little girl on the stand. He had seen it all, or so he thought. He had seen liars and cheats, weeping mothers, and defiant fathers. But he had never seen a look quite like the one on Maya's face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror. And in that moment, he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was not a simple custody case anymore. This was something else entirely. This was the beginning of a revelation that would stun everyone in that room, including himself. Asterisk, the silence in the courtroom was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every person held their breath, waiting for the little girl to speak. The lawyer, Ms. Peterson, tried again, her voice a little softer this time, a little more careful. Maya, it's okay? You can tell us. Are you happy at home? Maya's eyes, wide and glassy, darted from the lawyer to her mother, then to David, and finally to the judge. She looked like a small wild animal that had been cornered. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion. It was the wrong answer. The answer that no one was expecting. A sharp intake of breath came from Isabella's side of the table. David's confident posture seemed to shrink, his shoulders slumping forward slightly. Across the aisle, Robert, the biological father, sat up straighter, a flicker of something like triumph in his eyes. Ms. Peterson recovered quickly. Okay, Maya, she said, trying to steer the conversation back on track. That's all right. Sometimes we feel sad, don't we? But do you love your mommy and David? Maya's grip on her teddy bear was so tight her knuckles were turning white. She buried her face in the bear's matted fur, her small body starting to tremble. I want my mommy, she whimpered, her voice muffled by the stuffed animal. The judge, who had been watching the scene with a growing sense of unease, finally spoke. Ms. Peterson, he said, his voice calm but firm. Perhaps we can take a short recess. The child seems to be distressed. Isabella's lawyer looked like she wanted to object, but one look at the judge's face told her it would be a bad idea. Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice tight with disappointment. That might be for the best. The judge banged his gavel softly. We'll take a 15-minute recess. Soon as the words were out of his mouth, the tension in the room snapped. People started talking in hushed, excited whispers. Isabella rushed to the front of the room, her face pale with panic. David was right behind her. They both knelt down by the witness stand, trying to talk to Maya, but she wouldn't look at them. She just kept her face hidden in her bear, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The court advocate, the kind woman with the clipboard, gently shooed them away. Give her some space, she said softly. Let's get her some water. She led Maya out of the courtroom and into a small, private room nearby, leaving Isabella and David standing there, looking lost and helpless. Robert watched them go, a grim, satisfied smile on his face. He knew this was his chance. He had been telling the judge all along that they were an unstable home, and now his own daughter had just proven him right in front of everyone. In the small room, the court advocate gave Maya a small paper cup of water. Here you go, sweetie, she said, her voice gentle. Just take a few sips. Maya took the cup, her hands trembling so much that some of the water spilled onto her dress. She took a small sip and then just held the cup, staring down into it. The advocate sat down in a chair next to her. "You're doing a really brave job, Maya," she said. "I know this is all very scary." Maya didn't say anything. She just kept staring at the water. "Is there anything you want to talk about?" the advocate asked. "Anything you want to tell me?" Maya looked up at her, her eyes filled with a deep, bottomless sadness. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, a flicker of fear crossing her face. She shook her head. The advocate sighed. She knew she couldn't push. She just had to be there, a quiet, supportive presence. She had seen this before. Children who were caught in the middle of a custody battle often shut down. They were afraid to say anything, afraid of hurting one parent or the other, afraid of saying the wrong thing. It was a terrible position for a child to be in. Back in the courtroom, the 15-minute recess felt like an eternity. Isabella was pacing back and forth, her hands wringing. "What is she doing?" she whispered to David, her voice choked with emotion. "Why would she say that?" "She knows she's happy with us. We talked about this." David put his arm around her, trying to calm her down. "I don't know, Izzy," he said, his voice low and worried. "Maybe she's just confused. Maybe Robert got to her, said something to her before we came in." Isabella shook her head. "No, he wouldn't do that." "Would he?" She looked over at Robert, who was talking calmly with his lawyer. He looked so smug, so sure of himself. A wave of anger washed over her. "This is all his fault," she seethed. "He's trying to turn her against us." David held her tighter. "We just have to get through this," he said. "We just have to be strong for her." But even as he said the words, a seed of doubt was planted in his mind. He had always thought he had a good relationship with Maya. He loved her like she was his own. But what if he was wrong? What if deep down, she resented him? What if she missed her real father? The thought was like a punch to the gut. When the recess was over, everyone filed back into the courtroom. Maya was led back to the witness stand, her eyes still red from crying. She clutched her teddy bear like a lifeline. The judge looked at her, his expression kind but serious. "Maya," he said, "are you feeling a little better now?" Maya nodded, but she wouldn't meet his gaze. "Good," the judge said. "Now we're going to ask you a few more questions. And I want you to know that you are safe here. You can say whatever you need to say and no one is going to be mad at you. Do you understand?" Maya nodded again. "Good," the judge said. "Miss Peterson, you may continue." Miss Peterson stood up, but she seemed hesitant now. She had lost her confident stride. "Maya," she began, her voice cautious, "I want to go back to what we were talking about before. You said you weren't happy. Can you tell me why? Is there something at home that makes you sad?" Maya's eyes darted to David, who was watching her with a look of intense concentration. She quickly looked away, her gaze landing on her mother. Isabella was giving her a desperate, pleading look, a look that said, "Asterisk, please." "Maya, just say the right thing." Asterisk. Maya's lower lip started to tremble. She felt trapped. She wanted to make her mommy happy, but she also wanted to tell the truth. The truth was a scary, heavy thing, a secret she had been carrying around for a long time, a secret she was never supposed to tell. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What was that, Maya?" the judge asked. "You have to speak up." "Can't," she said, a little louder this time, her voice shaking. "I can't say." Miss Peterson looked at the judge, her expression one of defeat. She had nothing left to ask. She had tried to get the testimony she needed, but the little girl was a locked box, and she didn't have the key. "Your Honor," she said, "I have no further questions for this witness." A murmur went through the courtroom. This was not how it was supposed to go. Isabella and David's case was falling apart before their very eyes. The judge nodded. "Very well, Mr. Henderson. You may cross-examine the witness." Robert's lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, stood up. He was a sharp, aggressive man, and he looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He walked towards the witness stand, a confident smirk on his face. "Hi, Maya," he said, his voice smooth and friendly, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "My name is Mr. Henderson. I'm going to ask you a few questions too, okay?" Maya just stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. Now, you told Ms. Peterson that you weren't happy at home, is that right? He asked. Maya nodded. Can you tell the court why you're not happy? Is it because you miss your daddy? Is it because you want to live with me? He was leading her, putting words in her mouth, trying to get her to say what he wanted her to say. Isabella's lawyer was on her feet in an instant. Objection, Your Honor. He's leading the witness. Sustained, the judge said, his voice sharp. Mr. Henderson, ask your question. Mr. Henderson's smirk didn't falter. Of course, Your Honor, he said smoothly. He turned back to Maya. Maya, isn't it true that your mommy and David tell you bad things about me? Isn't it true that they try to keep you away from me? No, Maya whispered, shaking her head. No. Mr. Henderson pressed. Are you sure? Because that's what I've heard. I've heard that they say I'm a bad person. Is that what they say? No, Maya said, a little louder this time. They don't say that. Mr. Henderson was starting to look frustrated. His plan wasn't working. He had thought he could easily get the little girl to say what he wanted, but she was more resilient than he had expected. Okay, Maya, he said, changing tactics. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about your room. Do you have a nice room? Maya nodded. And you have lots of toys, right? She nodded again. And David reads you stories at night, doesn't he? This was it. The question. The one that was supposed to make everything clear. The one that was supposed to show everyone what a wonderful, loving father David was. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She looked over at David, who was watching her with a look of desperate hope. She looked at her mother, whose face was a mask of anxiety, and then she did something that no one expected. She looked at the judge, her eyes pleading. I don't want to answer that, she said, her voice trembling. The courtroom was completely silent. Everyone was staring at the little girl on the stand. The judge, the lawyers, the parents, the curious onlookers, they were all waiting for her to speak. To reveal the secret she was so desperately trying to keep. Mr. Henderson saw his opening. He knew he was pushing the limits, but he didn't care. He was so close to winning. He took a step closer to the witness stand, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Why not, Maya? What's the secret? What are you afraid of? Is David mean to you? Does he hurt you? Objection. Isabella's lawyer shouted, jumping to her feet. Your Honor, this is completely out of line. He is badgering the child. The judge's face was like thunder. He banged his gavel, the sound echoing through the silent room. Mr. Henderson, that is enough. Sit down now. Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at the judge's furious face told him to back down. He sulked back to his seat, his plan in ruins, but the damage was already done. The question was hanging in the air, a dark, ugly cloud over the courtroom. Does he hurt you? Maya was sobbing now, her small body racked with tremors. She looked so small and vulnerable. A tiny island of pain in a sea of adult conflict. The judge looked at her, his heart aching for her. He had seen a lot of terrible things in his time on the bench, but this was one of the worst. This was a child who was clearly in pain, a child who was carrying a burden that was too heavy for her to bear. He knew he had to do something. He had to get to the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had to be careful. He had to be gentle. He had to find a way to get her to talk, to break down the walls of fear that she had built around herself. He looked at the two families, sitting on opposite sides of the room. Their faces etched with a mixture of anger, fear, and desperation. He knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Asterisk, the sound of the gavel seemed to echo in the sudden, shocked silence. Mr. Henderson. The biological father's lawyer slunk back to his chair, his face a mixture of frustration and defeat. The judge's glare was enough to silence any further protests. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with tense energy just moments before, was now as still as a photograph. All eyes were fixed on the little girl on the witness stand, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. Her small body shaking with the force of her tears, Isabella, her mother, looked like she was about to collapse. Her face was ashen, her hands trembling as she reached out towards her daughter, a silent, desperate plea. David, the stepfather, stood frozen, his confident mask completely shattered. He looked at Maya, his eyes filled with a confusion that was quickly turning into panic. He had no idea what was happening, no idea why she was acting this way. He had always been so careful, so good to her. He had loved her like his own. What had gone wrong? The judge watched the scene unfold, his heart heavy with a sense of dread. He had seen a lot of things in his courtroom, but he had never seen a child break down like this. It was clear that something was terribly wrong, something that went far beyond a simple custody battle. He knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what. He couldn't let the questioning continue, not in this state, but he also couldn't just dismiss her. He had to find a way to get to the truth, to understand what was hiding behind her wall of fear. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that was raging inside him. "Let's take another recess," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "A longer one this time. I want everyone to clear the courtroom. Ms. Albright, Mr. Hayes, I'd like to see you in my chambers." Isabella and David looked at each other, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and dread. They were glad the questioning was over for now, but they knew this was far from over. The judge's request to see the lawyers in his chambers was a serious matter. It meant that he was taking this very seriously, that he was not going to let this go. As the people started to file out of the courtroom, Isabella rushed to the front, trying to get to Maya. But the court advocate, the kind woman with the clipboard, gently stopped her. "Just give her a minute, Isabella," she said softly. "Let's get her calmed down first." Isabella nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She watched as the advocate led Maya out of the courtroom, her small body still trembling with sobs. She felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. She wanted to hold her daughter, to tell her everything was going to be okay, but she couldn't. Was trapped, a spectator in her own daughter's pain. In the judge's chambers, the atmosphere was tense. The judge sat behind his large mahogany desk, his expression grave. Ms. Albright, Isabella's lawyer, and Mr. Hayes, Robert's lawyer, sat in chairs opposite him, their faces etched with anxiety. "All right," the judge began, his voice low and serious. "What in God's name is going on here?" Ms. Albright spoke first, her voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, I have no idea. Maya has never behaved like this before. She's always been a happy, well-adjusted child. This is completely out of character for her." The judge looked at Mr. Hayes. "And you, Mr. Hayes? What do you have to say for yourself? Your line of questioning was completely out of line." Mr. Hayes looked down at his hands, unable to meet the judge's gaze. "I apologize, Your Honor," he said, his voice low. "I got carried away. I was just trying to get to the truth." "The truth?" The judge scoffed. "You weren't trying to get to the truth. You were trying to get a specific answer, an answer that would help your client. You were badgering that child, and you know it." Mr. Hayes didn't say anything. He knew the judge was right. He had pushed too hard, and now he had to deal with the consequences. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is a mess," he said. "A complete and utter mess. I've never seen anything like it." He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had to figure out what to do next. He couldn't just send everyone home and pretend this never happened. He had a duty to that little girl, a duty to protect her, to find out what was really going on. He looked at Ms. Albright. "I want you to talk to your client," he said. "I want you to find out if there's anything she's not telling me, anything that could explain Maya's behavior." He then looked at Mr. Hayes. "I want you to do the same with your client. I want to know if there's any reason why Maya would be afraid of him, or of her stepfather." Both lawyers nodded, their faces grim. They knew this was not going to be an easy conversation, right? The judge said, his voice firm. "We're going to take a 1-hour recess. When we come back, I expect some answers. And if I don't get them, I'm prepared to take this case in a completely different direction. Do I make myself clear?" Both lawyers nodded again, their faces pale. They knew the judge was not bluffing. He was a man of his word, and he was not going to let this go. As they left the judge's chambers, Ms. Albright pulled Isabella aside. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and urgent. Isabella nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was coming. The lawyer was going to ask her the same question the judge had asked her, the question she had been dreading for years. The question she had been trying so hard to ignore. They found a quiet corner in the bustling courthouse hallway. Isabella, Ms. Albright began, her voice gentle but firm. I need you to be honest with me. Is there any reason why Maya would be afraid of David? Has he ever hurt her? Isabella looked away, her eyes filling with tears. She wanted to say no, of course not. She wanted to defend her husband, the man she loved, the man who had been a father to her daughter. But the image of Maya's terrified face, the sound of her sobs, was too much to bear. The doubt that she had been pushing away for so long came rushing back, a tidal wave of fear and uncertainty. I don't know, she whispered, her voice cracking. He's always been so good to her. He's always been so patient, so kind. But sometimes he gets angry. Not at her, never at her. But he has a temper. And he's very strict with her. He has a lot of rules. Ms. Albright listened patiently, her expression unreadable. What kind of rules, Isabella? Isabella took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. He doesn't like her to make a mess. He gets very upset if her room is not clean. And he has a special room in the basement. A quiet room, he calls it. He makes her go there sometimes when she's been bad. Ms. Albright's eyes widened. A quiet room? What does that mean? I don't know, Isabella sobbed. He says it's just a place for her to calm down, to think about what she's done. He says it's for her own good. But she hates it. She's always so scared when she has to go down there. Ms. Albright felt a chill run down her spine. This was it. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. The secret that Maya was so afraid to tell. She put a comforting hand on Isabella's arm. Okay, Isabella, she said, her voice soft but serious. This is very important. Did you ever go down to this quiet room? Did you ever see what was in there? Isabella shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. No, she whispered. He never let me. He said it was his special place with Maya that I wouldn't understand. Ms. Albright's heart sank. She knew, with a horrifying certainty, that this was not just a simple custody battle anymore. This was something much, much darker. She had to tell the judge. She had to protect Maya, no matter what the cost. As the hour-long recess drew to a close, lawyers and their clients gathered back in the courtroom. The atmosphere was even more tense than before. Everyone knew that something was about to happen, that the case was about to take a dramatic turn. The judge walked back into the room, his expression grim. He took his seat behind the bench, his eyes sweeping over the assembled crowd. He looked at Maya, who was sitting with her advocate, her eyes red and swollen from crying. He looked at Isabella, who was pale and trembling. He looked at David, whose face was a mask of confusion and fear. And he looked at Robert, whose face was a mixture of hope and dread. The judge took a deep breath, his mind made up. He knew what he had to do. He had to create a safe space for Maya, a space where she could finally tell the truth without fear of repercussions. He had to separate her from the people who were causing her fear, even if they didn't know they were doing it. He looked at David, his eyes cold and hard. Mr. David, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife, I want you to step out of the courtroom now. David looked at the judge, his face a mask of disbelief. What? Why? He stammered. You heard me, the judge said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Step out of the courtroom, and don't come back until I tell you to. David looked at Isabella, his eyes pleading. But Isabella just looked away, her face a mask of shame and fear. He knew in that moment that something was terribly wrong. He slowly stood up, his legs feeling like lead, and walked out of the courtroom, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a final, ominous thud. The judge then looked at Robert. Mr. Robert, he said, his voice a little softer this time. I want you to step out as well. Robert looked like he wanted to object, but he knew better. He too stood up and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the judge, the lawyers, and the little girl alone in the silent, cavernous room. The judge then looked at Maya, his expression softening. He knew that this was just the first step, The real challenge was yet to come. He had to find a way to get her to talk, to break down the walls of fear that she had built around herself. He had to find a way to set her free. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the profound silence that fell over the courtroom. With both fathers gone, the entire dynamic of the room had shifted. The air, once thick with tension and accusation, now felt heavy with a strange, solemn anticipation. It was no longer a stage for a legal battle. It had become a confessional. The judge, the lawyers, and the court advocate were no longer just officers of the court, but witnesses to a moment that felt sacred and deeply fragile. At the center of it all was Maya. She was still a small figure in the large, imposing witness stand, but something had changed. The rigid terror in her posture had softened just a fraction. She was still clutching her teddy bear, but her knuckles were no longer bone-white. She lifted her head slowly, her red, swollen eyes blinking in the quiet light. She looked at the empty doorway where the men had exited, then at her mother Isabella, who was watching her with a look of such heartbreaking love and regret it made the little girl's lip tremble. The judge leaned forward, his voice dropping to a gentle, almost grandfatherly tone. He removed his glasses, setting them carefully on the bench. He wanted to be seen not as an authority figure, but as a safe person. "Maya," he began, his voice soft and calm, "thank you for being so brave. I know that was very hard. But you're safe now. No one is going to be angry with you for anything you say in this room. Do you understand that?" Maya looked at him, her gaze searching his face. She saw no anger there, no impatience. She saw only kindness. She gave a small, hesitant nod. "Good," the judge said, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "That's very good." He then turned his attention to the court advocate, the kind woman who had been with Maya all morning. "Perhaps you could ask the questions," he suggested. "I think Maya would be more comfortable with you." The advocate nodded and walked slowly to the front of the room. She didn't approach the stand like a lawyer. She pulled up a simple chair, placing it a respectful distance away, and sat down, putting herself on Maya's level. She didn't have a legal pad or a pen. She was just there to listen. "Hi, Maya," she said, her voice as soft as the judge's. "Remember me? We had some water earlier." Maya nodded again. "Good," the advocate said. "We just want to talk for a little bit. Is that okay?" Maya's eyes darted to her mother, who was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face. Isabella gave her a tiny, encouraging nod, a silent permission to finally speak. The advocate followed Maya's gaze. "It's okay to look at your mommy," she said gently. "And it's okay to talk to us. We're all here to listen." She paused, letting the quiet settle around them. She knew she couldn't just rush in with the big questions. She had to build a bridge of trust, one small word at a time. The advocate began. "When I was a little girl, I had a teddy bear too. His name was Barnaby. He was my best friend. I told him all my secrets." Maya looked down at the bear in her arms. She stroked its matted head. "His name is Barnaby," she whispered. So quietly it was almost a breath. The advocate's heart ached at the sound of her voice. "Barnaby," she repeated softly. "That's a wonderful name. He looks like he's a very good listener." Maya nodded, her eyes still fixed on the bear. "Does Barnaby know why you were so sad in here earlier?" the advocate asked, her voice full of gentle curiosity. Maya's shoulders began to shake again. But this time, it wasn't the frantic, terrified sobbing from before. It was a deep, body-racking shudder of a child carrying a weight far too heavy for her small frame. She didn't answer, but the question had landed. "It's okay," the advocate coaxed, her voice a steady, calming presence. "Secrets can be very heavy to carry, can't they? Especially when you're told you're not allowed to tell them." This was the key. The acknowledgement of the rules she had been given. Maya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a sudden sharp shock. She looked at the advocate as if to say, "Asterisk, how did you know?" "Asterisk, it's a very important rule, isn't it?" The advocate continued, her voice never wavering. "A rule about a special place. A secret place." A single tear escaped from Maya's eye and traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. Her gaze fell to the polished wood of the witness stand, to the swirling grain patterns. She was lost in the memory. The advocate waited. She didn't push. She just sat there, a patient, silent anchor in the storm of the little girl's emotions. Finally, in a voice so small it was barely a whisper, Maya spoke. The basement. The word hung in the air, heavy and cold. The judge didn't move. Isabella let out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand. The lawyers, who had been watching with rapt attention, exchanged a grim look. The advocate leaned forward just a little. The basement, she repeated softly. Can you tell us about the basement, Maya? Maya took a shaky breath. She looked at her mother, then at the judge, then back at the advocate. The wall of fear was still there, but it now had a crack in it, a tiny fissure through which the truth was finally beginning to seep. He calls it the quiet room, she said, her voice trembling. But it's not quiet. It's scary. She paused, gathering her courage. She looked down at Barnaby the bear, and in a slightly stronger voice she said, It's not a game. He says it's a game, but it's not. He makes me go in there when Mommy is at work, and he locks the door. A collective, almost inaudible gasp went through the room. The judge's face, which had been kind and gentle, was now a stony mask of grim understanding. Isabella was openly weeping, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. The secret was out. The dark, terrible secret that had been poisoning their lives had finally been brought into the light. And as the little girl sat there, finally telling her truth, everyone in the room knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Asterisk, the words hung in the air, fragile and terrible. Like a single snowflake in a silent, frozen landscape, he locks the door. The quiet in the courtroom was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a heavy, suffocating presence, a shared horror that stole the breath from everyone in the room. The judge, a man who had spent a lifetime hearing the worst things people could do to one another, felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the courtroom's temperature. He looked at the little girl, who had finally lowered her head and was now crying quietly into her teddy bear. And he saw not a witness in a custody case, but a survivor of a war fought in secret. The spell was broken by a sound from the plaintiff's table. It was a raw, guttural noise of a heart breaking. Isabella, Maya's mother, had collapsed. She wasn't crying in a controlled, quiet way anymore. She was sobbing, a deep, body-racking sound of pure agony. Her lawyer, Ms. Albright, was trying to comfort her, but Isabella seemed to have folded in on herself, the weight of her daughter's words, her own willful ignorance, crushing her. The advocate rushed from the witness stand to Isabella's side, her face a mask of professional concern mixed with personal anguish. The judge watched this for a moment, his mind racing. The formalities of the custody case were now irrelevant, a distant memory. This was no longer about which parent could provide a better home. This was about a crime. His role had shifted from jurist to protector. He picked up a small, black phone on his bench, his hand steady despite the turmoil in the room. He spoke in a low, urgent voice that carried an unmistakable authority. Bailiff, to my chambers, immediately. He hung up the phone, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the lawyers. He didn't need to say anything more. They understood that the world had just tilted on its axis. He then looked at Ms. Albright. Counselor, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Get your client a glass of water, and be prepared for a very different kind of conversation. The courtroom door opened a moment later, and the bailiff stepped in. His usual calm demeanor replaced by a look of alert inquiry. The judge didn't even wait for him to approach. I need you to go outside, the judge said, his voice cutting through the stillness. You will find the two men who were just excused from this courtroom, David and Robert. You will detain David, place him under arrest. The charge will be false imprisonment, and we will be adding more, I am certain. Do not let him speak to anyone. Do not let him use his phone. Take him out of the building through the back exit. Is that clear? The bailiff's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, but his training took over. Yes, Your Honor, crystal clear. He gave a curt nod and turned on his heel, his purposeful stride echoing as he left the room. The judge then turned his attention to the other man. As for the biological father, Robert, Bring him back in. He has a right to know what is happening." The finality in the judge's voice settled over everyone. This was not a discussion. This was a command. The custody battle was over. A new, much darker chapter had just begun. A few tense minutes later, the bailiff returned, escorting a bewildered-looking Robert into the courtroom. He glanced at his ex-wife, who was now being helped into a chair by her lawyer, and then at his daughter, who was being held by the court advocate. His face was a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Robert," he said, his tone somber, "I apologize for the manner of your return, but the situation has changed dramatically. This is no longer a custody hearing. Your daughter has made a very serious allegation against her stepfather, an allegation that this court finds credible. As a result, Mr. David has been taken into police custody." Robert's jaw went slack. He stared at the judge, then at Maya, his mind struggling to process the information. All this time, he had been fighting for access, convinced he was being unfairly painted as an unfit parent. The thought that the real danger was in the home he had been fighting to get Maya out of was a staggering blow. The judge continued, his gaze now sweeping over the entire room. "This court is adjourned, indefinitely," then picked up his gavel, the symbol of his authority, and brought it down with a sharp, definitive crack that seemed to echo the finality of his words. The sound was not loud, but it was absolute. It was the sound of a door closing on one reality and opening onto another, much darker one. He looked one last time at Maya, who was now watching him, her tears subsiding, replaced by a look of exhausted relief. The secret was out. The burden was lifted. The long, painful journey toward healing had just begun. And in this courtroom, on this day, a little girl's quiet voice had finally roared, bringing a monster to justice and stunning everyone who was lucky enough to hear it.